She didn't drop her fork when he called her a charity case. The chocolate mousse trembled on the silver tines, suspended in air as the words cut across the glittering ballroom. Laughter rippled around the table of powerful men in expensive suits. His voice so familiar, once so grateful now, dismissive and cruel. "We carry a lot supporting her," he added with a conspiratorial chuckle to his boss, but her hand remained steady. Her spine, forged through decades of being overlooked, stayed ramrod straight. Only her clutch betrayed her, shifting slightly under pressure from fingers that had once signed the check that built his empire. They never expect the quiet ones to keep receipts. They mistake silence for forgetfulness, patience for weakness, grace for surrender. They build their legends on invisible foundations, claiming credit for towers they couldn't have constructed alone. They forget that charity doesn't charge interest. Investment does. And some debts, when finally called due, must be paid in full. Linda Hallberg adjusted her pearl earrings as she studied her reflection in the hallway mirror. 63 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled into an elegant chignon. Her appearance was as measured and deliberate as every decision she'd made in her life. She smoothed the lapel of her navy blazer, Brooks Brothers, 1992, still impeccable, a relic from her corporate days at Midwest Federal before early retirement. "Still not sure why I let you talk me into this," she said, turning to face her daughter. Vanessa. Vanessa. 38 was absorbed in her phone, fingers tapping furiously. "Because it's a big night for Evan. Mom, the Foundation's 4th anniversary gala is important to both of us." She looked up, her expression softening. "And family should be there." Linda nodded, though something in her daughter's tone, the slight emphasis on family, pinched at her. Family. The word had changed meaning over the years, expanding and contracting like a living organism. It now included Evan Hallberg, her son-in-law of 6 years, the ambitious software entrepreneur whose vision she had once bankrolled with more than just goodwill. "Is Emma excited about staying with Grandpa tonight?" Linda asked, changing the subject. "Thrilled. Dad promised Disney movies and ice cream sundaes." Vanessa glanced at her watch. "The car will be here in 5 minutes. You have the invitation." "Right." Linda's smile tightened. "I wasn't sent one. Remember, you added me to your +1 yesterday?" Vanessa's cheeks flushed. "Right, sorry. Evan said the guest list was locked weeks ago for the caterers. I'm sure it was just an oversight." "Of course," Linda replied, though they both knew better. An oversight, like her name missing from the Foundation's website, like her absence from the Our Story video that chronicled the Evan and Partners Foundation's meteoric rise from humble beginnings to philanthropic powerhouse. Like being seated at Table 7 last year, family and founders, yet somehow not mentioned during the speeches, thanking visionaries and early supporters, oversights that were beginning to feel deliberate. The Glasswell Conservatory glowed with elegant warmth as Linda stepped through its grand entrance behind Vanessa. Crystal chandeliers cast honeyed light across the marble floors, where Minneapolis's business elite mingled in black tie and designer gowns. Linda recognized several faces from newspaper business sections and charity circuit photos, venture capitalists, tech entrepreneurs, old money families whose support could make or break a foundation's reputation. "Stunning venue," she murmured to Vanessa, who was scanning the crowd with practiced poise. "Evan's board insisted on upgrading from the Hilton this year. Something about projecting the right image," Vanessa replied, her voice carrying a hint of discomfort with the extravagance. A waiter appeared with champagne flutes balanced on a silver tray. Linda took one, nodding her thanks. The bubbles caught the light as she took a small sip, remembering another glass raised in celebration years ago in her kitchen, the day Evan had signed the investment agreement, his hand trembling slightly with excitement over his fledgling HR software venture. "God, I hope this works," he'd said then, boyish enthusiasm making him seem younger than 32. "Even if it doesn't," she'd replied, "we've made it formal. That matters." The memory dissolved as a familiar laugh cut through the ambient chatter. Evan stood across the room, surrounded by a half circle of attentive listeners, gesturing animatedly as he delivered what was clearly the punchline to a well-rehearsed anecdote. At 41, Evan Hallberg had grown into his success. His tailored tuxedo emphasized broad shoulders, and confident posture suggested a man completely at ease with attention. His dark hair was now artfully styled to conceal early thinning, and his smile, always his greatest asset, remained dazzling under the spotlights. "There's Susan Valenti," Vanessa whispered, nodding toward a striking woman in her 50s standing near Evan. "She's COO at Hallberg Tech now, pulled from Microsoft last quarter. Evan says she's transformational. Linda studied Susan's sleek silver bob, commanding presence, minimal jewelry except for a single statement ring. Impressive credentials, she said. Has she been to the house for dinner yet? Next week, Vanessa replied. She's particularly interested in the Foundation's STEM education initiatives for girls. I ran a STEM mentorship program at Midwest Federal for 12 years, Linda remarked. The one that partnered with St. Paul Public Schools? Vanessa nodded absently, attention already drifting back to the crowd. You should mention that to her sometime. Linda took another sip of champagne, letting the comment pass. Vanessa had been 14 when Linda launched that program, too young to remember the late nights and weekend work it had required. Now it was just another forgotten fact, buried beneath the present's more pressing concerns. A young woman with a clipboard approached them, smile professional but eyes constantly moving, assessing. Mrs. Halberg, so glad you could make it. She nodded to Vanessa. The program's about to begin. We have you at table 3 near the stage. And my mother? Vanessa asked. The coordinator checked her list, frowning slightly. I don't see. Oh, here she is. Added yesterday. Table 18 in the back by the refreshments. There must be a mistake, Vanessa began. My mother should be with family. It's fine, Linda interrupted smoothly. I'm happy anywhere. The coordinator's relief was palpable. Wonderful, I'll show you to your table, Ms. Halberg. That's ridiculous, Vanessa whispered, face flushing. Let me find Evan. Don't, Linda said firmly. This is his night. I'll be fine. As the young woman led her through the crowd, Linda maintained her composure, nodding at acquaintances, smiling at strangers. Table 18 was indeed near the back, its occupants a mix of junior staff and what appeared to be distant connections to major donors. A young man in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo pulled out her chair with awkward courtesy. I'm Kevin, he offered. My uncle's on the board. First time at one of these? In a manner of speaking, Linda replied, settling into her seat. From this distance, the stage looked like a miniature theater. Evan and the board members now assembling there reduced to elegant figurines. The lights dimmed, and a spotlight found the podium. Conversation hushed as Evan stepped forward, charisma radiating from him like heat. Welcome, friends, supporters, visionaries, he began, voice resonant with practiced sincerity. Tonight we celebrate not just 4 years of the Evan and Partners Foundation, but the power of believing in potential. Linda watched him command the room, remembering the nervous young man who had once sat at her kitchen table, explaining his software idea with such earnest enthusiasm that she'd written the check before he finished his pitch. $30,000, a significant portion of her early retirement fund, with terms that had seemed fair to them both. When I started Halberg Tech with nothing but an idea and determination, Evan continued, I couldn't have imagined we'd be here today, surrounded by so many who share our vision. Nothing but an idea and determination. Linda's hand tightened slightly around her champagne flute. And $30,000 of startup capital. And a co-signer for the office lease. And her network of banking contacts who'd helped with the first round of proper funding. She took another sip, letting the bubbles numb her tongue. Our foundation now supports STEM education for underprivileged youth in 17 states, Evan continued, with plans to expand internationally next year. Applause rippled through the room. At her table, Kevin and the others clapped enthusiastically, caught up in the momentum of philanthropy and proximity to power. Linda joined in politely, wondering when exactly the "and partners" had been added to the foundation's name. It hadn't been there in the beginning. Back then, in accordance with their agreement, it had been simply the Halberg Foundation, in keeping with the naming rights clause she'd insisted on 18% annual return and her family name on any philanthropic entity that grew from the investment, a clause that now seemed to have been conveniently forgotten. As dinner was served, seared scallops, filet mignon with truffle reduction, chocolate mousse with gold leaf, Linda made pleasant conversation with her table mates. Kevin turned out to be studying finance at the University of Minnesota and was deeply impressed when she mentioned her former position at Midwest Federal. That's serious corporate experience, he said. Do you still do any consulting work? Occasionally, she said. These days I'm more involved in community projects, garden club, literacy volunteers at the library. What she didn't mention was how her professional network had gradually unraveled after retirement, how Midwest Federal's merger with First National had scattered her former colleagues across the country, how quickly 3 decades of business expertise could be reduced to garden club in others' eyes. Midway through the main course, Linda excused herself and made her way to the restroom. In the quiet elegance of the marble-lined ladies' lounge, she touched up her lipstick and adjusted a silver hairpin. The woman at the next sink diamond earrings. Chanel Clutch gave her a cursory smile. Wonderful event, isn't it? The woman offered. The foundation does such important work. Indeed, Linda replied. Have you been involved long? Oh, 3 years now. My husband's company is a corporate sponsor. Evan's vision is simply remarkable, building all this from scratch. Linda met the woman's eyes in the mirror. Did you know the foundation was actually started with family investment? The woman looked momentarily confused. I thought Evan used the proceeds from his tech company. That too, Linda said with a small smile. But initially, it was a family member who provided the capital to get everything off the ground. How interesting, the woman said, though her tone suggested it wasn't particularly. She snapped her clutch closed. Well, enjoy the rest of the evening. Linda watched her leave, then took a deep breath. Once, she would have introduced herself properly, established her connection, ensured that her contribution was acknowledged. Once, that would have seemed important. Now, she simply dried her hands and returned to the ballroom, where Evan was moving from table to table, greeting guests with practiced charm. When he reached table 3, she watched him embrace Vanessa, kiss her cheek, include her in a group photo with board members. He would make it to table 18 eventually, or perhaps not. Either way, Linda would maintain her dignity. We carry a lot supporting her now. Evan's voice carried across the room, followed by polite laughter. You know how it is with family. She's basically a charity case. Linda's fork froze midair, the edge of chocolate mousse trembling slightly on the prongs. The conversations at her table continued uninterrupted, but the words had reached her with perfect clarity despite the distance. She lowered her fork to her plate with deliberate calm, gaze tracking across the room to where Evan stood surrounded by a group of men in expensive suits. Susan Valente was among them, her expression politely neutral as she sipped champagne. Something wrong with the dessert? Kevin asked, noticing her untouched mousse. Just saving room, Linda replied, her voice steady despite the sudden chill that had settled in her chest. Charity case. The words echoed in her mind, ugly and distorted. Was that how Evan saw her? How he spoke of her to others? The woman who had written the check that launched his future. She glanced toward table 3, where Vanessa was engaged in animated conversation with a board member. Had she heard, did she know this was how her husband referred to her mother? The room suddenly felt too warm, the chatter too loud. Linda folded her napkin precisely and placed it beside her plate, then reached for her clutch. Heading out early? Kevin asked. Fresh air, she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was lovely meeting you, Kevin. Good luck with your studies. She made her way through the crowd with measured steps, stopping only when she reached the terrace doors. Outside, the night air was crisp with early autumn, the Minneapolis skyline a glittering backdrop against the dark sky. Linda moved to the stone balustrade, setting her clutch down and gripping the cool surface with both hands. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, waiting for the anger to subside. It didn't. Instead, something hardened within her, not rage, but resolve, a clarity that had been building for months, perhaps years, crystallizing in this moment of perfect insult. Mrs. Halberg? Linda turned to find Susan Valente standing in the terrace doorway, silhouetted against the golden light from inside. Ms. Valente, Linda acknowledged with a slight nod. Enjoying the evening. Susan stepped forward, her heels clicking against the stone. I saw you leave rather abruptly. She paused, studying Linda with intelligent eyes. I think I know why. Linda raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Evan's comment was inappropriate, Susan continued, her tone matter of fact. And inaccurate, I suspect. Very, Linda agreed, turning back to the view. Though I'm curious why the COO of Halberg Tech would concern herself with a social faux pas. Susan moved beside her at the balustrade. Because I make it my business to understand the companies I join, including their foundations. She paused. And their founders. Linda gave her a sidelong glance. You've done your research. Enough to know that Halberg Foundation was the original name before the Evan and Partners rebrand 2 years ago. Susan's gaze was direct, enough to suspect there's a story there. For a moment, Linda considered deflection a polite non-answer, a change of subject. The habits of a lifetime of social grace were deeply ingrained, but something in Susan's frank assessment invited honesty. There is, Linda confirmed, though it's not one Evan enjoys telling. Susan nodded, waiting. I provided the initial investment for Halberg Tech, Linda said simply. $30,000, structured as a formal agreement, not a gift, 18% return, compounded quarterly, with naming rights for any philanthropic ventures that resulted from the company's success. Susan's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a significant seed investment and specific terms. I believe in making expectations clear, Linda replied, particularly when it comes to family and money. Yet the foundation now bears Evan's name, not yours. Indeed. Linda's smile was thin. An oversight, I'm sure. Susan's answering smile held a hint of approval. I've found that in business. Very few things happen by oversight. She straightened, reaching into her clutch to retrieve a business card. I'd be interested in hearing more about this investment agreement sometime. Perhaps coffee next week. Linda accepted the card, noting the heavy stock and embossed lettering. I'd be happy to discuss it further. Excellent. Susan glanced back toward the ballroom. I should return before I'm missed. It was a pleasure meeting you properly, Mrs. Halberg. Linda, please. Linda. Susan nodded once, then turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. Oh, and Linda, I wouldn't worry too much about what Evan says to those investors. Most of them have the attention span of goldfish. By tomorrow, they'll have forgotten everything except how much they pledged. After Susan disappeared back into the golden light of the ballroom, Linda remained on the terrace, the business card cool between her fingers. For the first time that evening, she felt something shift in her favor, a small realignment in a balance that had been off-kilter for too long. She opened her clutch and carefully placed the card inside, her fingers brushing against something else, a folded document she had carried for years, but never needed to use. Until now. Perhaps, charity case. Evan had called her. The words still stung, but differently now. Not with shame, but with purpose. Charity doesn't charge interest, she murmured to the night air. But I do. The following morning, Linda sat at her kitchen table, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden meticulously tended through 20 Minnesota seasons. Before her lay an open laptop, a legal pad, and a slim manila folder containing a document she hadn't reviewed in years. She took a sip of black coffee, no sugar today. She wanted clarity, not comfort, and opened the folder. The sponsorship agreement looked exactly as she remembered, 3 pages, professionally drafted by her friend Nadira, who had been a corporate attorney at Midwest Federal. The language was precise, the terms unambiguous. Principal $30,000 terms, 18% annual return, compounded quarterly naming rights clause. In the event of successful launch, any philanthropic entity established within the brand portfolio must carry the name Halberg or forfeit 30% of equity value for breach. At the bottom, 2 signatures hers, steady and confident, Evans, eager and slanting forward as if racing toward the future, both witnessed by Nadira's neat notary stamp, dated September 17, 2017. Linda remembered that day clearly. Vanessa had been in Chicago for a marketing conference. Evan had arrived at her door practically vibrating with excitement, his HR automation software concept finally refined enough to seek initial funding. The banks won't touch it yet, he'd explained, spreading his business plan across her dining room table. Too early stage, no proven concept, but with your banking background, if you could see the potential. She had seen it, not just in the business plan, which was solid if optimistic, but in Evan himself, his intelligence, his drive, the way he'd swept Vanessa off her feet with his unwavering certainty that success was inevitable. I'll write you a check, she'd said finally, but we do this properly. Terms, paperwork, everything documented. He'd looked surprised. You don't trust me? I trust the version of you that keeps promises in writing, she'd replied. Now, 6 years later, she calculated the numbers carefully on her legal pad. Principal plus interest, compounded quarterly at 18% for 5 years. The figure that emerged was substantial, $78,222.90, and that didn't include the breach of the naming rights clause. She leaned back in her chair, considering her options. The agreement was legally binding. She had no doubt about that. Nadira had ensured it was airtight, but pursuing it meant confrontation, potential family discord, maybe even damaging Vanessa's marriage. The back door opened, interrupting her thoughts. Vanessa entered, still in her dress from the previous night, makeup slightly smudged. She looked exhausted. Mom, she said quietly. Can I come in? Linda closed the folder and rose to put on a fresh pot of coffee. Of course, sweetheart. Late night, after party at the Graves Hotel. Vanessa sank into a chair. Donors, board members, the usual networking. Linda set a mug of coffee before her daughter. You left without saying goodbye last night. I looked for you, Vanessa said, not meeting her eyes. Someone said you'd stepped outside. Linda nodded, deciding not to press the issue. How was the rest of the evening? Fine, successful. They raised almost 2 million in pledges. Vanessa hesitated, then added, I wanted to talk to you about something I overheard. Linda's hand stilled on the coffee pot. From Evan, Vanessa looked up, surprised. You heard it too. The charity case comment. Yes. Mom, he didn't mean it that way. Vanessa said quickly. You know how Evan gets when he's trying to impress people. He exaggerates, makes jokes. Is that what it was? A joke? Linda's voice remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. To reduce my investment, my support, to charity. Vanessa looked down at her coffee. It was a poor choice of words. It was a revealing one. Linda returned to the table and reopened the folder, sliding the agreement across to her daughter. I found this last night. Vanessa's brow furrowed as she scanned the document. The investment agreement, you kept this. Did you think I wouldn't? It was so long ago. Vanessa's finger traced the signature line. I didn't know there was a naming rights clause. There is. Linda tapped the relevant section. Any philanthropic entity was to bear the Halberg name, not Evan and Partners. Vanessa's face paled slightly. This changes everything. No, Linda said firmly. It just reminds us what was true all along. They sat in silence for a moment, the contract between them like a third presence in the room. Finally, Vanessa looked up. What are you going to do? Linda considered the question carefully. I'm going to meet with Susan Valente next week. She expressed interest in the original investment structure. Evan's boss, Vanessa's voice rose slightly. Mom, you can't. I'm not doing anything underhanded, Linda replied evenly. I'm simply sharing factual information about an investment I made, information that should have been acknowledged long ago. This will humiliate him, Vanessa argued, in front of his board, his colleagues. And being called a charity case wasn't humiliating for me. Linda's calm finally cracked, revealing the hurt beneath. Having my contribution erased from the foundation's history, being seated at the back of the room like an afterthought. Vanessa fell silent, guilt flickering across her face. I'm not trying to damage Evan's reputation, Linda continued, her voice softening. I just want recognition for my role, the role that was agreed upon in writing. Vanessa reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. I understand, and you deserve that recognition, she hesitated. But please, talk to Evan first. Give him a chance to make this right. Linda studied her daughter's face, so like her own at that age, earnest and hopeful, and felt her resolve waver slightly. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I won't be brushed aside again. After Vanessa left, Linda returned to her calculations, adding a new column breach of naming rights, 30% of foundation equity. The numbers grew more imposing, but it wasn't really about the money. It never had been. It was about acknowledgement, about truth, about a woman who had spent her life building things, a career, a family, a community refusing to be written out of her own story. She picked up her phone and composed a text to the number on Susan's business card. Coffee would be lovely. How's Tuesday at 10? The reply came almost immediately perfect. Cafe latte on Grand Ave. I'm looking forward to our chat. Linda sent a confirmation, then set down her phone. Outside, autumn sunlight gilded the changing leaves of her maple tree, the one she'd planted when she'd bought this house as a divorced single mother 30 years ago. It had grown strong and tall, its roots deep and established, just like her claim to what she was owed. Cafe Latte hummed with Tuesday morning energy business meetings, friends catching up, the gentle clatter of ceramic and silverware punctuating the atmosphere. Linda arrived 5 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a view of the entrance. She wore a burgundy blazer over a cream silk blouse, pearl earrings, and carried a leather portfolio containing copies of the sponsorship agreement and her calculated figures. Presentation mattered in business meetings, something 30 years in banking had taught her well. Susan Valente arrived precisely at 10, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit that spoke of authority without trying too hard. She spotted Linda immediately and approached with confident strides. Linda, she greeted, extending her hand. Thank you for suggesting this. Their almond croissants are legendary. I ordered a plate for the table, Linda replied, gesturing to the pastries and coffee already waiting. Old banking habit, always have refreshments ready when discussing numbers. Susan smiled appreciatively as she took her seat. Efficient. I like that. They exchanged brief pleasantries about the weather, the cafe, the aftermath of the gala. Susan mentioned the final fundraising total $2.3 million in pledges with a satisfied air of someone who had helped engineer a success. Impressive for a relatively young foundation, Linda acknowledged. It is. Susan agreed, though after our conversation at the gala, I've been curious about its origins. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. The official materials say Evan established it with proceeds from Halberg Tech's Series B funding round in 2019. Linda smiled thinly. A simplified narrative. I suspected as much. Susan set down her spoon. You mentioned an investment agreement. Linda opened her portfolio and removed the document, sliding it across the table without comment. Susan read it carefully, her expression revealing nothing until she reached the naming rights clause. Then her eyebrows rose slightly. 18% is aggressive, she remarked, but fair for an early stage investment with no collateral, and the naming clause is quite explicit. Nadira Peterson drafted it, Linda explained. She was senior counsel at Midwest Federal when I was there. She doesn't leave room for misinterpretation. Susan nodded, continuing to study the agreement. This is a legally binding contract, properly executed and notarized. She looked up. Has Evan made any payments against the interest? No, Linda said. Initially, I wasn't concerned about immediate returns. The plan was for repayment after the company established stable profitability. Which it did, 3 years ago. Susan's tone was matter of fact. Halberg Tech posted 8-figure profits last fiscal year. Yes, Linda confirmed. Yet the interest remains unpaid, and as you've seen, the naming rights clause has been disregarded entirely. Susan leaned back, assessing Linda with new interest. So why haven't you pursued this before now? Linda took a sip of her coffee before answering. Family dynamics are complicated. Vanessa's happiness has always been my priority, and confrontation seemed unnecessary. Until recently. Until being called a charity case at a public event, Susan supplied, among other accumulated slights. Yes. Susan nodded, her gaze direct. May I be frank? Please. This agreement gives you significant leverage, not just financially, but in terms of the foundation's public image and credibility. Susan tapped the document with one manicured finger. If it became known that the foundation's origin story omitted its primary seed investor, and that said investor was the founder's mother-in-law, the optics would be problematic, Linda finished. Extremely. Susan's smile was slight but appreciative. Especially with our planned expansion into corporate responsibility consulting, authenticity and transparency are our selling points. Linda considered this new information. I'm not interested in damaging the Foundation's work. The STEM initiatives for girls, in particular, align with causes I've long supported. Of course, Susan agreed, which is why I think there's an opportunity here for mutual benefit. She paused. What exactly are you hoping to achieve? Linda. It was a direct question that deserved a direct answer. Linda straightened in her chair. Recognition of my role in establishing both Halberg Tech and the Foundation, payment of the interest owed under the agreement, and compliance with the naming rights clause moving forward. Susan nodded thoughtfully. All reasonable requests based on the contract terms. She considered for a moment. Would you be open to a formal role with the Foundation, perhaps on the advisory board or recognition committee? Linda hadn't expected this angle. Potentially, though I'd want meaningful involvement, not a ceremonial position. Understandable? Susan returned the agreement to Linda's portfolio. I'd like to take this information back and consider the best approach. Evan reports to me directly now, and this, she gestured to the portfolio, changes the dynamics considerably. And if Evan resists, Linda asked. Susan's smile turned knowing. Let me worry about that. Executives often need guidance on reputational matters. She reached for her purse. May I take a copy of the agreement? Linda had anticipated this request and removed a sealed envelope from her portfolio. Already prepared. Susan accepted it with an appreciative nod. I can see why you were successful at Midwest Federal. She stood, extending her hand again. I'll be in touch within the week. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. As Susan left, Linda remained at the table, finishing her coffee with a sense of cautious optimism. She had expected resistance, perhaps dismissal. Instead, she'd found an ally in an unexpected place. Her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Did you meet with Susan? Please tell me you didn't. Linda considered her response carefully before typing. We had coffee. It was a productive conversation about recognition and legacy. I'll tell you more when we speak. She paid the bill and gathered her things, stepping out into the bright October morning. For the first time in years, she felt the scales beginning to balance in her favor, not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of documentation and truth. They had called her a charity case. She had brought receipts. The summons came sooner than Linda expected. 3 days after her coffee with Susan, An email arrived from the Evan and Partners Foundation with an official letterhead, Dear Ms. Halberg, you are cordially invited to attend a special meeting of the Foundation's Recognition Committee on Friday, October 15th at 2:00 p.m. The committee will be reviewing historical contributions and updating our founding documentation. Your presence and input would be greatly valued. Sincerely, Marjorie Bell, Chair, Recognition Committee. Linda read the email twice, noting what wasn't said as much as what was. No mention of Susan, no reference to the investment agreement, just a formal invitation that could mean anything from genuine acknowledgement to damage control. She forwarded the email to Nadira with a brief note. Your contract is getting attention. Should I bring you as counsel? Nadira's response was swift and characteristic. Not yet. Let them show their hand first. I'm available if needed. And Linda, remember you have all the leverage here. Friday arrived with the first real chill of autumn. Linda dressed carefully in a sage green suit that projected both authority and approachability, paired with her mother's vintage Tiffany brooch, a small silver oak leaf that had always felt like a talisman of strength. The Foundation's offices occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown building with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Mississippi River. Linda was greeted in the reception area by a young woman who introduced herself as Marjorie Bell's assistant. The committee is assembled in the main boardroom, she explained, leading Linda through a corridor lined with framed photographs of Foundation events. Ms. Valente asked that you be shown in once everyone was seated. An entrance designed for impact. Then, Linda found herself approving of Susan's strategic thinking. The boardroom doors opened to reveal a long table surrounded by 8 people, 4 men and 4 women, all with the polished appearance of successful professionals. Susan sat at the far end, with an empty chair to her right. Evan was positioned midway down the left side, his expression carefully neutral despite the slight tension visible in his jaw. Ms. Halberg, Marjorie Bell rose to greet her, extending a hand. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marjorie Bell, Chair of the Recognition Committee. Linda shook her hand firmly. Thank you for the invitation. Please, Susan gestured to the empty chair beside her. We've just begun reviewing the Foundation's historical documentation. As Linda took her seat, she noted the folders placed before each committee member, red with the Foundation's logo embossed in gold. She also noted that Evan wouldn't meet her eyes, his attention fixed on his own folder with unnatural concentration. For those who haven't had the pleasure, Susan said smoothly, Linda Halberg is Evan's mother-in-law and, as we've recently discovered, the original seed investor for both Halberg Tech and, by extension, this foundation. Murmurs of interest rippled around the table. Linda maintained a composed expression, though she couldn't help noticing the slight flush creeping up Evan's neck. Ms. Halberg, Marjorie continued, we've been reviewing the investment agreement you provided to Ms. Valente. She tapped the folder before her. It raises some significant questions about our historical records and recognition practices. I'm happy to clarify anything about the agreement, Linda offered. Perhaps we should begin with the naming rights clause, suggested an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The document stipulates that any philanthropic entity resulting from the initial investment must bear the Halberg name. That's correct, Linda confirmed. When the foundation was first established in 2019, it was indeed called the Halberg Foundation, in compliance with that clause. All eyes turned to Evan, who finally looked up. His expression was a complex mixture of embarrassment and defiance. The rebranding to Evan and Partners occurred in 2021, he acknowledged stiffly. It was a board decision based on marketing recommendations to distinguish the foundation from the corporate entity. Yet the agreement wasn't amended, Susan pointed out, nor was Ms. Halberg consulted about the change. It was an oversight during a period of rapid growth, Evan replied, his tone growing defensive. We were expanding programs into 5 new states that year. Linda met his gaze directly for the first time. An oversight that has continued for 2 years, Evan. Along with the oversight of not acknowledging my initial investment in any of the Foundation's materials or public statements, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Marjorie cleared her throat. The committee's purpose today is not to assign blame, but to rectify historical records and ensure proper recognition moving forward. She turned to Linda. Ms. Halberg, what would you consider an appropriate resolution? Linda had prepared for this question. 3 things, she said calmly. First, compliance with the naming rights clause, either by restoring the original name or by prominently incorporating Halberg in the Foundation's title. Second, formal acknowledgement of my role as founding investor in all materials and communications. Third, payment of the interest specified in the agreement. She did not mention the breach of contract clause or the potential 30% equity claim. That card remained in reserve. Those seem like reasonable requests based on the documentation, said one of the younger committee members. The interest calculation would be $78.2290 as of this month, Linda replied without hesitation. Evan's expression tightened further. That's a significant sum for a nonprofit to absorb in its operating budget. A sum that would have been more manageable if addressed when first due, Susan observed coolly. However, I believe we can structure a payment plan that doesn't impact our program funding. The discussion continued for another hour, with the committee reviewing options for amending the foundation's name, updating its materials, and scheduling interest payments. Throughout, Linda maintained her composure, neither pushing too hard nor conceding too much. Evan spoke little, his initial defensiveness gradually giving way to resigned acceptance. By the meeting's end, a three-point plan had been approved. The foundation would be renamed the Halberg Legacy Foundation. Linda would be formally recognized as founding investor in all materials and at the upcoming winter gala, and the interest would be paid in 4 quarterly installments beginning immediately. We'll need board approval for the formal name change, Marjorie noted, but I anticipate no resistance given the documentation and legal standing of the original agreement. As the meeting adjourned, committee members approached Linda individually, offering handshakes and business cards, suddenly eager to connect with the newly discovered founding investor. Linda accepted their overtures graciously, though she noted the calculation behind their sudden warmth. Evan remained seated as the room emptied, staring at the closed folder before him. When only he, Linda, and Susan remained, he finally looked up. "You could have come to me directly," he said, his voice low, "instead of going over my head to the board." "I could have," Linda agreed, "just as you could have acknowledged my contribution years ago, instead of erasing it from the foundation's history. I never intended," he began. "Intentions matter less than actions, Evan," Linda interrupted gently. "And your actions made your intentions quite clear." Susan, who had been reviewing notes at the end of the table, closed her portfolio and stood. "I have another meeting, but I wanted to thank you both for handling this professionally." Her gaze lingered on Evan. "I expect the transition to be smooth and the new recognition protocols to be implemented immediately." After Susan left, a heavy silence fell between Linda and her son-in-law. Evan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded Linda of his younger self, the earnest entrepreneur who had once been so grateful for her support. "This will impact Vanessa," he said finally. "She's invested in the foundation's image, its connections. Vanessa understands the importance of honoring agreements," Linda replied, "and of respecting family." Evan's jaw tightened again. "Is that what this is about, respect?" "Partly," Linda acknowledged, "but it's also about recognition, about not being treated as a footnote in a story I helped write." She paused, then added quietly, "About not being called a charity case at public events." Evan had the grace to look ashamed. "That comment was inappropriate. I apologize." "Thank you," Linda said, rising from her chair. "I appreciate that." As she gathered her things, Evan remained seated, seeming suddenly smaller in the large boardroom. "What happens now?" he asked. Linda considered him for a moment. "Now, we move forward. The foundation continues its good work with a more accurate reflection of its origins. You continue leading it, and I take my rightful place in its story." She walked to the door, then turned back. "One more thing, Evan. Charity doesn't charge interest. Investment does. Remember that distinction." As she left the building and stepped into the crisp autumn air, Linda felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not the weight of anger or resentment, but of invisibility. For years, she had allowed herself to be erased for the sake of peace, for Vanessa's happiness, for the appearance of family harmony. No more. Oh, she had reclaimed her place not through confrontation or drama, but through the quiet power of documentation and truth, the very tools she had always trusted throughout her career. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nadira. "How did it go?" Linda smiled as she typed her reply. "They counted me out. I was counting interest." The Halberg Legacy Foundation's Winter Gala transformed the Minneapolis Institute of Art into a wonderland of silver and blue. Ice sculptures glittered beneath tasteful lighting, while string musicians played from a small stage near the grand staircase. Unlike the autumn gala, this event felt different from the moment Linda arrived, beginning with her invitation, embossed with her name and the designation Founding Investor. "Mrs. Halberg, welcome." The young woman at the registration desk beamed. "You're at the head table tonight, seat 3, right beside Ms. Valente." Linda accepted her place card with a small smile, remembering how just 3 months earlier, She'd been relegated to table 18 near the restrooms. Now, as she made her way through the crowd, she noted the subtle shift in how people regarded her nods of recognition, respectful smiles, the deference accorded to someone of importance. Linda Susan Valente approached, elegant in midnight blue. Perfect timing. The photographer wants shots of the foundation leadership before dinner. Leadership. The words settled comfortably as Susan guided her toward a small group gathered before a banner bearing the foundation's new name, the Halberg Legacy Foundation. Evan stood at the center, polished and professional in his tuxedo, though Linda detected tension in his smile as he spotted her. Vanessa stood beside him, beautiful in emerald green, her expression a complex mixture of pride and lingering discomfort with the situation. Linda, we need you center right for the official photo, the photographer called, gesturing to a spot beside Evan. As she took her position, Linda felt Evan stiffen slightly. Smile, everyone, the photographer instructed. This is for the annual report cover. Linda maintained her composure through the flashes, conscious of the symbolism of this moment, not just her physical presence in the photo, but what it represented: correction, recognition, restoration of truth. Excellent, the photographer said. Now just the founding team, Evan and Linda, please. This was new. Linda glanced at Susan, who nodded encouragingly. Evan stepped forward mechanically, and Linda joined him before the foundation banner, their names now linked in gleaming silver letters above them. Closer together, the photographer suggested. You're partners in this legacy. Evan managed a professional smile as he moved fractionally closer. Ready for the gala speech? He asked under his breath. Of course, Linda replied quietly. I've had years to think about it. The photograph captured an image of apparent unity, the visionary and his founding investor, the foundation's origin story now properly illustrated. Only Linda and Evan knew the tension beneath the surface, the careful recalibration of power and recognition still in progress. After the photos, Linda circulated through the crowd, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about her role with gracious brevity. She had no interest in embarrassing Evan or overplaying her newly acknowledged position. This wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. Mom, there's someone you should meet. Vanessa appeared at her elbow, guiding her toward an elegant woman in her 70s. This is Margaret Hoffman, chair of the Women in Finance Mentorship Program. I've been hoping to connect with you, Margaret said warmly, clasping Linda's hand. Susan mentioned your background at Midwest Federal and your STEM mentorship initiative. We're expanding our high school outreach program and could use someone with your experience. Linda felt a spark of interest, her first in months. I'd be happy to discuss it. I ran a similar program for 12 years. Wonderful, Margaret beamed. Let's schedule lunch next week. Here's my card. As Margaret moved on, Vanessa lingered. You'd be perfect for their advisory board, she said. They need someone with both corporate and community experience. Linda studied her daughter's face. You seem more comfortable with all this than I expected. Vanessa sighed. It's been an adjustment for everyone. But seeing your name on the banner, where it belongs, it feels right. She hesitated. Evan is trying. Mom, this hasn't been easy for him. I know, Linda acknowledged. And I appreciate his cooperation with the committee's decisions. The dinner chimes sounded, and they made their way to the head table. Linda found herself seated between Susan and a major donor, with Evan directly across from her. The symmetry wasn't lost on her: equal visibility, equal prominence. Throughout the meal, poached salmon, wild rice with cranberries, hazelnut tort conversation flowed easily around topics of foundation achievements and future initiatives. Linda spoke when addressed, but mostly observed, noting how Evan had mastered the art of donor engagement, his charm undimmed despite the recent adjustments to his narrative. As coffee was served, Marjorie Bell approached the podium. Welcome, friends and supporters, to the first gala of the Halberg Legacy Foundation. She paused for applause. Tonight marks not only a celebration of our work, but a more complete recognition of our origins and founding vision. Linda felt the weight of eyes turning subtly toward her. It is my pleasure to introduce our co-speakers this evening, our executive director, Evan Halberg, and our founding investor, Linda Halberg. The applause swelled as Evan rose and moved to the stage. His speech was polished and forward-looking, focusing on the Foundation's achievements and ambitious plans for expanding STEM education initiatives nationally. He acknowledged Linda briefly but appropriately, noting her critical early support and ongoing guidance. When it was Linda's turn, she approached the podium with measured steps, conscious of creating a first impression for many in the audience. She wore her authority comfortably. The result of decades in boardrooms and executive meetings before early retirement had reshaped her identity. Thank you, Marjorie, and good evening, everyone. she began, voice clear and confident. While many of you are meeting me formally for the first time tonight, the truth is that my connection to this foundation began at a kitchen table 6 years ago, when a young entrepreneur shared a vision that I believed was worth investing in. She kept her remarks brief and gracious, focusing on the foundation's mission rather than the recent corrections to its historical record. This wasn't the place for airing grievances or claiming victory. It was about establishing her rightful place in the narrative with dignity. Investment isn't just about financial returns, she concluded. It's about belief in potential, in vision, in the power of support given at the right moment. I'm proud to see how that initial investment has grown into the impactful organization we celebrate tonight, and I look forward to contributing to its continued evolution. The applause was warm and genuine. As Linda returned to her seat, she caught Susan's approving nod and noted the mixture of emotions crossing Evan's face, relief that she hadn't said more, perhaps, combined with the gradual acceptance of this new reality. Later, as the evening wound down, Linda found herself on the museum's terrace, enjoying a moment of quiet beneath the winter stars. The temperature had dropped, but her wool wrap provided adequate protection against the Minnesota chill. Quite a different view from the last gala's terrace, isn't it? Susan's voice came from behind her. Linda turned with a small smile. Considerably improved. Susan joined her at the stone balustrade. Your speech struck exactly the right tone. Professional, forward-looking. No hint of the struggle it took to get here. There was no need to revisit that tonight, Linda replied. The correction has been made. That's what matters. Susan studied her with evident approval. You know, when I first looked into the Foundation's history after our conversation at the Autumn Gala, I expected to find the usual family business messiness, hurt feelings, miscommunications, maybe some opportunism. What I found instead was a clear breach of contract and a woman who had the documentation and determination to rectify it. Yet you chose to help facilitate that rectification rather than protect Evan's version of events, Linda observed. Why, two reasons, Susan replied. First, as COO, my responsibility is to the organization's long-term reputation and integrity. A foundation built on an incomplete origin story is vulnerable to exactly the kind of revelation that occurred. Better to control the narrative change than have it forced upon us. Linda nodded. And the second reason, Susan's smile turned slightly wry. Let's just say I recognized something in your situation. I've been the invisible architect behind male success stories more than once in my career. She gestured toward the party inside. But unlike some, I've learned to ensure my contributions are properly documented and acknowledged. The two women shared a moment of understanding the unspoken recognition of parallel experiences that crossed generations. The first interest payment was processed yesterday, Susan added. You should see it in your account by Monday. Thank you, Linda said. I have plans for those funds. Oh, Susan raised an eyebrow. A seed grant program for women entrepreneurs over 50. Linda explained. The demographic most overlooked by traditional venture capital, despite having the highest success rates. Susan's expression brightened with interest. That's actually brilliant. The foundation might be interested in partnering on something like that. I'd welcome the conversation, Linda replied, but this initial fund will be established independently, under my sole direction. Susan nodded, understanding perfectly. Of course. Some things we need to build entirely on our own terms. As they returned inside, Linda caught sight of Evan deep in conversation with a group of donors. His gestures were animated, his charm in full deployment. She felt a complicated mixture of emotions, pride in his abilities, frustration at how those same talents had been used to minimize her, and now a cautious hope that they had found a sustainable new equilibrium. Vanessa approached, holding Linda's coat. Ready to head out. Mom-Dad just texted that Emma's asking for her goodnight call. Linda checked her watch, nearly 10. Yes, I should be getting home. As they waited for the valet, Vanessa studied her mother with new eyes. You were amazing tonight. I've never seen you so, I don't know, powerful in your element. Linda smiled. I spent 30 years in banking. Sweetheart, executive meetings, investor presentations, that was my daily life before retirement. I know, but Vanessa hesitated. I guess I forgot that version of you, or never fully appreciated it. The comment stung slightly, though Linda understood its truth, how easily professional women of her generation became reduced to their family roles after retirement, their career accomplishments fading into background information, mentioned occasionally but rarely centered. Well, Linda said lightly, it seems we're all remembering now. Spring brought renewal to more than just Linda's carefully tended garden. The first quarterly interest payment, $19,550.72, provided the seed capital for her new initiative, the Second Act Fund, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs over 50. Linda converted her rarely used formal dining room into a home office, installing a sleek desk, ergonomic chair, and dual monitors for reviewing business plans and conducting virtual mentoring sessions. The oak dining table remained for in-person meetings, now complemented by a professional coffee station and presentation board. On a sunny April morning, she sat reviewing applications, impressed by the quality and diversity of the ventures seeking support a sustainable textile company founded by a former fashion executive, a specialized healthcare app developed by a retired nurse, a financial literacy program created by a former community college professor. The doorbell interrupted her assessment of a particularly promising urban farming concept. She opened the door to find Nadira on her doorstep, legal briefcase in hand. Perfect timing, Linda greeted her friend. I was just about to call you about the fund's operational structure. Nadira, now 68 and semi-retired from her legal practice, followed Linda to the transformed dining room. Look at you, she said approvingly, surveying the professional setup. Back in the game and on your own terms. Hardly a game, Linda replied, pouring them both coffee. But yes, definitely on my terms this time. Nadira set her briefcase on the table and extracted several folders. I've drafted the governance documents for the Second Act Fund as we discussed. Simple structure, maximum flexibility, clear criteria for investment and mentorship. She paused, studying Linda over her reading glasses. You seem energized, happier than I've seen you in years. Linda considered this as she took her seat. I am. There's something profoundly satisfying about using Evan's interest payments to fund women who've been overlooked by traditional investors. A kind of poetic justice. Speaking of Evan, Nadira said, how are things with the foundation now? Has the dust settled? Mostly, Linda replied. The name change is complete across all materials. I'm officially recognized as founding investor in their documentation. I attend quarterly board meetings as an observer, though I've declined a voting position. Wise, Nadira nodded. Keeps you involved without entangling you in governance conflicts. Exactly, and Vanessa seems to have made peace with the new arrangement. She's even introducing me to potential partners for the Second Act Fund. Linda sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Evan remains professionally cordial. That's probably the best outcome you could expect, Nadira observed. Not everyone can gracefully accept correction, especially when it affects their carefully constructed public narrative. Before Linda could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Can you meet for lunch tomorrow? Something important to discuss. Linda felt a flicker of concern. Vanessa wants to meet, says it's important. Trouble? Nadira asked. Unclear, Linda replied, typing a quick confirmation to her daughter. But she's been unusually enthusiastic about my fund lately, almost compensating for something. The next day, Linda arrived at Spoon and Stable 15 minutes early, securing a quiet corner table. She wore a coral blouse that brightened her complexion, paired with a light gray blazer, professional but approachable, her standard uniform these days. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, slightly breathless and carrying a leather portfolio similar to Linda's own. At 38, she increasingly resembled Linda at that age, confident, polished, with the same determined set to her jaw when focused on a goal. Thanks for meeting on such short notice, Mom, she said, settling into her chair. I wanted to talk to you before things get more complicated. Linda felt her internal alert system activate. What kind of complications are we discussing? The waiter appeared, and they ordered roasted beet salad for Linda, spring vegetable risotto for Vanessa. When he departed, Vanessa leaned forward. Evan's been offered a position in Chicago, she said without preamble. Chief Innovation Officer at Midwest Alliance, overseeing their corporate philanthropy and technology integration. Linda absorbed this news carefully. That's a significant opportunity. When would this happen? August, if he accepts, Vanessa replied. They want him to establish a regional hub for the Halberg Legacy Foundation there as part of the arrangement. Linda noted the implications immediately. And what are your thoughts on relocating? Vanessa fidgeted with her water glass. It's complicated. My firm has a Chicago office, so transferring is possible. Emma would adjust. She's young enough. But, she hesitated, then met Linda's eyes directly. I'm concerned about what this means for you. For the foundation recognition, the interest payments, everything we've just established. The genuine concern in her daughter's voice touched Linda. 6 months ago, Vanessa had been caught uncomfortably between husband and mother. Now she was prioritizing Linda's interest in the equation. That's thoughtful of you, Linda said gently. But my agreement with Evan is legally binding regardless of geography. The foundation name and my recognition are established now, documented in all the official materials. Yes, but day-to-day influence, oversight that would change if operations moved to Chicago, Vanessa pressed. And I know how important this has been for you, finally receiving proper acknowledgement. Their food arrived, providing a moment for Linda to consider her response. The truth was, Vanessa had a point. Physical distance would inevitably diminish her involvement and visibility, potentially allowing the old narrative to gradually reassert itself through subtle, incremental changes. Have you discussed this with Evan? Linda asked after the waiter departed. How does he see the Foundation's connection to Minneapolis continuing? Vanessa took a bite of risotto before answering. He's proposed maintaining the main office here while establishing the Chicago hub as an expansion. Board meetings would alternate between locations. She hesitated. But he's also suggested this might be a good time to streamline the Foundation's branding again for the Chicago market. There it was the first attempt to erode the correction so recently established. Linda felt a flicker of the old frustration, but kept her expression neutral. Streamline how, exactly? He mentioned possibly using just Halberg Foundation for simplicity. Dropping the legacy part, says focus groups find it cleaner, more modern. Vanessa watched her mother carefully. I told him any changes would need your approval under the agreement. Linda nodded, pleased by her daughter's understanding. Indeed they would, and I would not approve removing legacy from the name. She set down her fork. The term was specifically chosen to acknowledge the Foundation's true origin story. It stays. Vanessa seemed relieved by the firmness of Linda's position. I'll convey that clearly. And, Mom, I want you to know I support whatever measures you need to take to protect your role and recognition. I've learned a lot through this whole situation. Linda reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. I appreciate that, sweetheart. But I don't want you caught in the middle any more than necessary. This is between Evan and me, and our respective attorneys if needed. After lunch, as they walked to their cars, Vanessa hesitated beside her BMW. There's one more thing, she said. Evan doesn't know I'm telling you this, but there's talk of a book deal about the Foundation's work and his entrepreneurial journey. Linda stopped short. A book, a business publisher approached him last month. The Halberg Method, or something similar. Success principles, leadership philosophy, the Foundation's impact model. Vanessa looked uncomfortable. I've seen the outline. The current draft of the origin story mentions family support, but doesn't specifically name you or detail your investment. Despite the spring sunshine, Linda felt a chill. After everything, the documentation, the committee review, the formal recognition, Evan was already planning to reshape the narrative in a more permanent form. Thank you for telling me, she said evenly. That's very valuable information. What will you do? Vanessa asked. Linda considered for a moment. For now, nothing. Let me think about the best approach. She kissed her daughter's cheek. Don't worry. We'll find a solution that protects everyone's interests. As she drove home, Linda's mind worked through options with the methodical precision that had made her successful in banking. A direct confrontation would only create more family tension. Legal action was possible, but messy. There had to be a more elegant solution, one that would ensure her role couldn't be minimized again, regardless of geographic distance or media platform. By the time she pulled into her driveway, she had the beginnings of a plan. She sent a text to Susan Valente Need to discuss foundation governance and intellectual property rights. Coffee tomorrow. Susan's reply came almost immediately, 11 a.m. My office. I think I know what this is about. Susan's corner office at Halberg Tech offered sweeping views of the Minneapolis skyline. She greeted Linda with a firm handshake and guided her to a small conference table already set with coffee and water. I assume this is about Evan's potential move to Chicago? Susan began, wasting no time on pleasantries. And possibly about the book project he's been discussing with Mercer Publishing. Linda raised an eyebrow. You're well informed. It's my job to know what affects company and foundation operations, Susan replied, especially when it involves our public narrative. Linda appreciated the directness. Then you understand my concerns. Geographic distance creates opportunity for gradual revision of the established record. And a book provides a platform for cementing a preferred version of history, Susan added, nodding. Very legitimate concerns. Linda sipped her coffee. What's your stake in this situation? Susan, you've been supportive of proper recognition, but I'm curious about your longer-term perspective. Susan considered the question thoughtfully. Professionally speaking, I believe organizations thrive on integrity and accurate attribution. The foundation's credibility is strengthened, not weakened, by acknowledging its true origins. She paused. Personally, I've spent decades watching women's contributions be minimized or erased. I find it satisfying to help prevent that when I can. Then we share common ground, Linda noted. But we need structural solutions, not just good intentions. Once Evan establishes operations in Chicago, informal influence becomes less effective. Susan nodded. You're thinking about governance mechanisms. Among other things, Linda confirmed, the current arrangement relies heavily on Evan's cooperation, which has been adequate but reluctant. I need more durable protections. Susan opened a folder on the table. I anticipated this conversation might be coming. I've had legal review several options. She slid a document toward Linda. This is a draft revision to the Foundation's bylaws that would establish a permanent Legacy and Historical Accuracy Committee with specific authority over how the Foundation's origin story is presented in all materials. Linda scanned the document with interest. And the committee's composition. You would serve as permanent chair, with right of appointment for 2 additional members. Susan explained. The committee would have review and approval rights for any public-facing content regarding the Foundation's history, including publications, website content, grant applications, and her eyes met Linda's meaningfully. Any books or media produced by Foundation leadership? Evan would never agree to this, Linda said, though she was impressed by the thoroughness of the proposal. Not voluntarily, Susan acknowledged, but the Foundation Board might, especially if presented as a condition of your continued support and the waiving of certain rights under your original agreement. Linda looked up sharply. What rights did you have in mind? The breach of naming rights clause, Susan said simply. By my calculation, you could claim approximately $3.6 million in equity value for the previous violation. That's a significant motivator for the board to ensure no future breaches occur. Linda sat back, surprised by Susan's calculation and by the fact that she had clearly done substantial homework on Linda's leverage points. You've given this considerable thought, she observed. Susan's smile was slight but genuine. Let's just say I appreciate thorough preparation and clear documentation, something we have in common. I believe they spent the next hour refining the proposal, with Susan making notes for her legal team. The resulting framework was elegant in its simplicity. Linda would waive her claim to the breach of contract penalty in exchange for structural governance changes that would permanently secure her role in the Foundation's history and give her authority over how that history was presented. There's one more element to consider, Susan said as they concluded. Evan's book project. Linda nodded. That concerns me most of all. Once published, a book becomes a fixed reference point that shapes public perception regardless of official Foundation materials. Exactly. Susan agreed, which is why I've already spoken with Mercer Publishing's legal department about potential copyright and trademark issues related to the Foundation's name and story. Linda's eyebrows rose. You have, as CEO, intellectual property protection falls under my purview, Susan explained smoothly. I simply informed them that any book describing the Foundation's work and history would require formal review and approval from the Foundation Board to ensure accuracy and appropriate attribution. And their response? They've agreed to include standard language in the contract requiring Foundation approval of any content directly describing its operations or history. Susan's expression remained professional, but Linda detected a hint of satisfaction. Publishers are generally risk-averse when it comes to potential legal complications. As their meeting concluded, Linda felt a growing appreciation for Susan's strategic thinking and for having such a formidable ally. What had begun as a simple correction of the record had evolved into a more comprehensive restructuring of power and narrative control. Thank you, Susan, she said as they walked to the elevator. Your insights have been invaluable. My pleasure, Susan replied. The board meets next Tuesday. I'll present these recommendations as part of our governance review. She pressed the down button. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, what are you doing with the interest payments? I'm curious how you're reinvesting them. Linda smiled. Come by my house next week. I'll show you the Second Act Fund and introduce you to our first cohort of entrepreneurs. Susan's interest appeared genuine. I'd like that. Women supporting women in business. It's how we change the system from within. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Linda reflected on how differently this scenario was unfolding from what she might have expected 6 months ago. She had sought simple recognition and financial compensation. What she was gaining instead was structural influence, expanded purpose, and unexpected alliances. They had called her a charity case. She was building a legacy instead. The Foundation Board meeting occurred behind closed doors, but Vanessa texted updates throughout Governance Committee presenting new bylaws. Discussion about historical accuracy committee? Evan looks tense but professional. Finally, late Tuesday afternoon board approved everything 7-1. Evan the only no vote. We're still going to Chicago, but the foundation structure is locked in with your protections. Linda read the message twice, allowing herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Not victory, this had never been about winning or defeating Evan, but rightful restoration, properly documented and structurally protected. She replied simply, "Thank you for keeping me informed. Let's have dinner soon, just us." The following week brought another significant development, the second quarterly interest payment of $19,550.72 transferred promptly to Linda's account, without the resistance or delay she had half expected. Perhaps Evan was finally accepting the new reality. Or perhaps he simply recognized that fulfilling his legal obligations was the cleanest path forward. Either way, the funds allowed her to finalize selection of the Second Act Fund's first investment recipients, 5 women entrepreneurs whose business plans had shown exceptional promise. Patricia Gage, 63, developing sustainable textile alternatives after 30 years in the fashion industry. Marguerite Wilson, 58, creating a specialized healthcare app based on her experience as a nurse practitioner. Helen Cho, 56, launching a financial literacy program targeting underserved communities. Diane Fredericks, 67, expanding her urban farming initiative to include training programs for seniors. Carol Wright, 52, commercializing her innovative water filtration system after early retirement from environmental engineering. On a warm May evening, Linda hosted a launch reception in her backyard garden. Flowering crabapples and lilacs provided a fragrant backdrop as the 5 entrepreneurs mingled with mentors, potential partners, and select media representatives. Susan attended, as did Marjorie Bell and several other foundation board members, their presence a tacit acknowledgement of Linda's emerging influence in Minneapolis's philanthropic community. Vanessa arrived midway through the event, apologizing for her lateness. "Board meeting ran long," she explained, accepting a glass of white wine. "But I wouldn't have missed this." She surveyed the gathering with evident admiration. "Mom, this is incredible. You've put this together in what, 3 months? When you know what you're doing, things can move quickly," Linda replied. Each of these women had decades of expertise and fully developed concepts. They just needed someone to take them seriously. Vanessa nodded, watching as Patricia Gage demonstrated her biodegradable textile samples to an interested group. Evan sends his regrets. By the way, Chicago meetings. Linda appreciated the diplomatic phrasing. "Of course, I understand." As the evening progressed, Linda found herself drawn into conversations about expanding the Second Act Fund's model regionally, possibly in partnership with the Foundation's Women in STEM initiatives. The synergy made sense, her fund providing later stage support for women the Foundation might initially help through education and early career development. "We should formalize the pipeline," Susan suggested as they discussed possibilities. "The Foundation identifies promising candidates through its programs, and your fund provides the next stage support when they're ready to launch." "That could work," Linda agreed, "though I want to maintain separate governance and decision-making authority." "Absolutely," Susan nodded. "Independence with strategic alliance, the best of both worlds." As guests began to depart, Vanessa helped Linda collect wine glasses from around the garden. "I'm really proud of you, Mom," she said quietly. "This fund, these women, you're making such a difference." Linda smiled, touched by her daughter's sincerity. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot coming from you." "I just wish." Vanessa hesitated. "What?" "I wish you and Evan could find a way to truly collaborate, not just coexist through legal frameworks." Vanessa set down her tray of glasses. "You're both so talented, so driven. Imagine what you could accomplish together if there was real trust." Linda considered her daughter's words carefully. "Trust requires honesty, Vanessa, and respect. Those were broken, and rebuilding them takes time." She touched her daughter's cheek gently. "But we have a functional arrangement now, and that's progress." Later, after all the guests had gone and Linda was preparing for bed, she received an unexpected email. The sender, Evan Halberg. The subject line, book project update. She opened it with cautious curiosity. "Linda, Mercer Publishing has suggested including a Founder's Perspectives chapter in the book, featuring first-person accounts from key figures in the Foundation's establishment. Would you be willing to contribute a 1,500-word section describing your role as founding investor and your vision for the Foundation's work?" The chapter would appear early in the book, establishing the complete origin story from multiple viewpoints. "Please let me know if this is of interest. If so, I'll have the publisher contact you directly to discuss details and compensation. Regards." Evan. Linda read the email twice, considering its implications. This wasn't merely compliance with the new governance rules, it was a step beyond, offering her the opportunity to tell her version of events in her own words, permanently documented in published form. Whether motivated by genuine reconciliation or simply pragmatic acceptance of the new reality, Evan's offer represented a significant shift. After months of correction and negotiation, he was finally acknowledging that her perspective belonged in the official narrative. Linda composed her reply carefully. Evan, thank you for including me in this project. I would be happy to contribute a section describing my role and vision for the foundation. Please have the publisher contact me to discuss specifics. I appreciate your recognition that the Foundation's story is enriched by multiple perspectives. Best regards, Linda. She pressed send, then stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the garden now empty of guests but full of spring promise. The crabapple blossoms glowed silver in the moonlight, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed a reminder that journeys continue, even after significant stations have been reached. 6 months ago, she had been erased from a story she helped create, relegated to the margins of her own investment. Now she was not only properly acknowledged, but invited to document her experience for others who might face similar situations. They had called her a charity case. She had reclaimed her narrative. And in doing so, she had found not just recognition, but renewal, a second act that honored her experience while creating opportunity for others. The interest payments that represented correction of past erasure were now funding women who might otherwise be overlooked, creating a virtuous cycle of recognition and support. Linda turned from the window and picked up her reading glasses, settling into the armchair beside her bed with a leather portfolio containing business plans for the Second Act Fund's next cohort of applicants. There was work to do, stories to champion, legacies to build, not just her own, but those of women whose potential remained untapped. Charity doesn't charge interest, she thought as she opened the first file. But investment returns in ways that compound over time. The Halberg Legacy Foundation's spring gala sparkled with possibility beneath crystalline lights. Linda stood at the edge of the garden, watching as 5 women entrepreneurs, each over 50, each previously overlooked, shared their visions with investors who now listened intently. She fingered the embossed invitation in her pocket. Founding investor. It read, her name etched in silver. 6 months ago, she'd been seated at table 18, near the restrooms, invisible despite the $30,000 that had launched an empire. Tonight, she'd spoken from the podium, her contribution documented in annual reports, bylaws, and soon, a book bearing witness to the truth. The garden lights caught the silver in her hair as she smiled, remembering how they'd underestimated her, the quiet mother-in-law with meticulous records and unwavering patience, how they'd confused her dignity for weakness, her grace for surrender. In the distance, Evan worked the crowd with practiced charm, their professional detente, a delicate balance of legal frameworks and mutual respect born not from affection, but necessity. They had called her a charity case. She had built a legacy. Some battles aren't won with confrontation, but with documentation. Some victories aren't measured in defeat, but in restoration. And sometimes, the most powerful statement isn't what you take, but what you build with the interest when they finally pay what they owe.